Welcome to the Arrive podcast, the U.S. immigration law podcast for Canadians. I am Jeremy Richards, and I'm here with my business partner and fellow immigration attorney, Christine Jurusik. Together, we are Richards and Jurusik Immigration Law, practicing U.S. immigration law from our offices in Buffalo, New York, and Toronto, Ontario. And we help Canadians to work and live in the United States. If you haven't already, please follow and like us on your podcast app. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Richards and Jurusik Immigration Law, and follow us and like us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram for regular updates on U.S. immigration law that we have created just for Canadians. In addition, on our website, there is a resources tab where you can subscribe to a weekly newsletter where you will receive all our recent updates and posts about U.S. immigration law as well. In this episode of the Arrive podcast, we are going to be discussing sponsorship by a U.S. citizen relative. So if you're a Canadian and you have a U.S. citizen spouse, an adult child, or a parent, or other qualifying relative, maybe it's a brother or sister that wants to sponsor you to come to the United States, that's the process we're going to be discussing today. And there's two ways you can do it. And we've talked in a previous episode, if you go back into our older episodes, we talked about what's called adjustment of status. And that's where you come into the United States and you do a one-step filing inside the United States, and you're sponsored by a U.S. citizen relative to stay here permanently and to get a green card. That's what's referred to as adjustment of status. There's another option that is referred to as consular processing, because you process through the consulate when you get your immigrant visa, and then you come to the United States. And these are all done through the consulate in Montreal. No matter where you live in Canada, unfortunately, you can live
even if you live in Vancouver, you got to go to Montreal.
You've got to travel to Montreal, which is a big inconvenience for some people. But Canada has a limited number of people, so they only have one location in the entire country that processes these immigrant visas. So the initial process is the same, whether you're doing an adjustment of status or consular processing. There's a form that has to be filed by your U.S. citizen relative who's petitioning you. And it's referred to as an I-130 petition for, they call it alien relative. That's, the U.S. still uses the term alien. If you're not from the United States, you're from another world. We refer to it as, I refer to it as petition for foreign relative. So that I-130, the purpose of it is to establish that you have what they refer to as a bona fide relationship. In other words, is your relationship with this individual who's a U.S. citizen, is it real for love if it's a spouse, or is it a real father-child, mother-child, parent relationship, brother-sister relationship? Is this a real relationship with the U.S. citizen, or are you trying to pull the wool over their eyes and are you trying to commit fraud? That's what that petition's for, to determine that this is, in fact, a real relationship. This is a brother or sister. This is a mother or father. This is a spouse of a U.S. citizen. Therefore, they qualify to receive a green card or permanent residence in the United States. So that I-130 petition is very important in this process, because you can't do the adjustment of status or consular processing unless that I-130 is approved. So even though it's a joint filing, if you're adjusting, you still need to include the proper evidence when that's filed in order for you to pass scrutiny in order to adjust and get your green card. Or if you're consular processing, in order for you to go to the next step that we'll discuss later. But that I-130 is very important. And it comes down to, and I'm looking at right now, a notice that we received from an individual who decided that they were going to do their I-130 on their own. And they were going to petition, they were a U.S. citizen, and they were petitioning their parent, which in most instances is a fairly straightforward process if you're doing an I-130 for a parent. You include your parent's marriage certificate, birth certificates, proof that this is, in fact, your parent, right? That you have a parent-child relationship. Once that I-130 is approved, then depending on how you, and this is where we're going to get into some intricacies of this process, depending on the box you check on the form, it's going to either send your I-130 petition to an office here in the United States. They refer to them as USCIS field offices, who will then take your case and process it further. Or it'll be forwarded on to what is called the National Visa Center, which is the central processing for all immigrant visa applications throughout the world.
For people that are outside of the United States.
Outside the U.S. So if it's field office, if you're adjusting and you're in the U.S., and it'll go to a National Visa Center if you're outside of the U.S. And the National Visa Center will then shuffle some papers and send it to the appropriate consulate. So for you Canadians, after the NVC's done, it'll go to Montreal. But first things first, the I-130. This individual, and they contacted us because they said that they needed to file a form that's typically not required in this process.
Right. If it's done correctly.
This you
don't
form's
need
not
this
required.
step. Yeah.
And it's called action on an approved petition is what it's referred to as. And we don't need to get into it in too much detail. But basically what it is you're telling the USCIS field office in the United States that your relative isn't here in the U.S. They're actually in a foreign country, and you want them to process at that foreign country. And then you request USCIS to then send the petition to that foreign consulate for processing. Well, if you follow the application correctly, there's a box that asks, where will your relative be processing? Will your relative be adjusting status? In other words, will they be doing it inside the U.S.? Or will they be processing overseas at a consulate? And then you would select.
Because they live outside the United States.
They live outside the U.S. And then you select the country here. Let's say you would select Montreal, Canada, that you'd be processing because you're Canadian. Well, this individual, for some reason, thought it was a good idea to check both adjustment of status as well as consular processing. So typically when the approval notice comes in, USCIS knows what to do with it because you checked.
You checked a box. So
either
it knows
one,
what you
and
want.
not
Right.
both. You checked adjustment of status, so it'll go to the field office, or you checked consular processing, so it'll go to NVC and then on to the consulate in Montreal. Well, this individual checked both. So USCIS and the approval notice, and this was actually the first time I've ever seen it because we don't make this mistake. So we've never received one.
I've never heard of this mistake being made before, but
this individual did it. And I'm actually surprised I'm actually surprised they didn't reject it in the first place because they checked both boxes. Oftentimes they'll do that.
I mean,
too.
That's the thing, right? So if you make a mistake on some of these forms, they're not in the business of making sure you do things correctly. That's up to you. So if you make a mistake like this, they have a way to deal with it, which is send you a notice. Yeah.
Request information.
Yeah, right.
So I'm actually surprised they didn't just reject this because on its face it was done incorrectly, and they can do that. If they're missing a signature, a check isn't filled out correctly, or you didn't check a box, they'll kick it back. Or worst case scenario, they could take your money and deny it. But for some reason, USCIS took this case and they still processed it. Good thing is it got approved. But the notice, and I'm going to read what it says here because I found it's not comical for this person, but it's the first time I've ever seen it. It says the above petition has been approved. However, you indicated on the petition that the beneficiary intends to apply for an immigrant visa abroad at a U.S. embassy or U.S. consulate, in other words, consular processing. And you also indicated that they will be applying for adjustment of status in the United States. Since you have indicated both options, USCIS has retained the petition. Bad news for this person.
So they decided in their wisdom that they would, since this person didn't choose, they would choose for them. And they chose the wrong option. So
USCIS said, we don't know what to do with this, so we're just going to hold it here. And then what happens now is
they said they're holding it. They're not going to adjust it.
No, they held it. They're just holding it.
So they didn't send it to the field office?
Well, because it wasn't a concurrent.
Okay.
They didn't follow the adjustment of status application, just the I-130.
Okay. So they're holding
it saying, hey, if this person's in the U.S., then move forward with an adjustment of status application. If they're not in the U.S., however, well, you're going to have to file this extra form that's going to cost you more fees. In addition to that, this form that they're referring to have action on an approved petition with USCIS takes about 18 to 24 months to process. So the parents of this individual could have been right to the next step to get their interview and then go to the consulate.
They would have been in the U.S. by then. Yeah.
Well within a year.
Yeah.
But now it's not even going to get to the consulate
for another
for at
2
least
years.
2 years.
Yeah.
So this mistake is huge. In fact, well, you could argue that this individual should just file a new petition because it's going to process faster than doing this request for action on an approved petition. But that's another story. So the error
true.
here,
They should just start over from scratch, really,
it'd be much faster
and do it correct.
So this individual, simply by checking the wrong box.
And how long has he waited for this decision?
Let's see. Well, it was a parent of U.S. citizens, so they processed pretty quickly. This was approved. It was actually approved within 9 months, so it was pretty quick.
But still, that's 9 months.
Well, 9 months. So this case arguably could have been done within 18 months because it processed so quickly, even with National Visa Center and Consular Processing, right? An interview. Now they're tacking another 18 months at a minimum on top of that. So the parents could have been here. In the meantime, it's going to take 3+ years for the parents to come rather than a year and a half.
And all because somebody got
checked
a little
the wrong box.
Yeah.
So
had a little extra time with their pen.
They probably just didn't know what they were doing, which is...
Well, they didn't know which option would work best. They weren't aware of the ramifications of choosing one over the other, so they chose both.
Maybe the parents were here when they filed it and then went back to the home country.
Or maybe they just thought that they could make the decision at the time it's decided.
But you cannot. You have to do it ahead of time.
Yeah.
And if you are going to do it this way, the best way actually is to check consular processing over adjustment of status. Because then if you can change your mind and adjust just by simply entering the country and filing for adjustment.
Yes.
You don't have to file this what's called I-824. But if you do what this individual did and USCIS retains it, you have to ask them to send it to the consulate. So big mistake. And there are other mistakes that can impede the processing of your petition for your foreign
Sure, that's
relative.
just one box that was checked wrong. And there's how many boxes on this form?
Oh, yeah. There's
how many pages,
right?
Right.
And there's 2, right? There's one for, if it's a spouse, you actually have to fill out 2 separate forms. So there are many opportunities for error. But there's also what is called initial evidence. All of these petitions must be supported by the minimum required initial evidence. For example, if you're filing for a spouse, the minimum evidence is you need to prove whoever the petitioner is, that your petitioner, if you're Canadian, you need to show the person petitioning you is a U.S. citizen. So their passport, naturalization certificate of birth abroad, whatever they have to prove they're, in fact, a U.S. citizen. You also have to prove what your citizenship and nationality is. You need to prove that you are legally married. If you had previous marriages, that those were terminated. And then you get into what's called Bona Fides. And that's where the bulk of these applications come. That's evidence that you are, in fact, living in a marital union. You had kids together. You have joint bank accounts. You have joint leases or properties, health insurance, whatever it is. All of that laundry list of evidence, they review to determine that this is a real marriage.
And that only really applies to spouses, though. So if you're in any other kind of familial relationship with a U.S. citizen, you typically don't have to prove the relationship beyond the documentation that
biographic documents,
right? So your birth certificate and things like that. But in the only other instances where you have a U.S. citizen father who was not married to your mother
that complicates
at the time, right? So then you have to prove that was your dad. They're not just going to accept simple documentation on a lot of those cases.
Yeah, your father had to have raised you,
yes,
and have been a part of your life,
right? So that would be another type of case that would require the type
That's
of
a more complicated,
a Bona Fides type situation. But we focus mainly on spouses. That instance doesn't come up too often.
And those can actually be more complicated than a spousal case.
Mm-hmm, true.
And they could ask, if they want, they could ask for a DNA test to prove relationship.
Yeah, we've seen that.
So this initial evidence, if your application doesn't have all the right boxes checked, if it doesn't have those signatures and dates and right filing fees and correct initial evidence, they could accept your application, and USCIS is really mean like this, accept your application, and then on a very simple review, when they find one of these deficiencies, they can deny it.
Mm-hmm.
And say denied for lack of initial evidence or because you checked the wrong box, whatever it is. There are many reasons that we've seen these denied because somebody just did it wrong.
How many times have you seen where they give a refund after they found a wrong box checked and they send your check back?
Well, never.
Right. They don't. They
Absolutely
keep your money.
Never.
They keep your money, and they could wait 6 months to tell you this as well. So you've wasted half a year and all that cash towards an application where you checked one wrong box, and that truly honestly happens. So
all the time.
Yeah.
We have, this case in point that we were just talking about is going to cause additional processing time as well as money for this individual. And that's where we often get the question. I had somebody ask me this yesterday, Canadian, enter the United States. This person actually came in through Thousand Islands area, married to a U.S. citizen. Why should we hire you guys? Why should we even hire an attorney? Well,
right. This seems like a straightforward process, and we're married, so I'm just going to file my own paperwork. It doesn't make any sense. I don't need legal assistance.
And you may be successful, but if you're not, you're talking, it's not days of delays. When you mess up an immigration case, it's months to years of delays. In addition, you're paying the filing fees again.
Hundreds to thousands of dollars, depending on your type of case, yeah.
And so should I hire an attorney or is it worth it? Well, if you ask me, I'll say yes. Why? Probably going to get processed within normal processing times if you use an attorney and they know what they're doing. And you're not going to have to pay duplicate fees if it's filed correctly. So you'll get peace of mind that it's being filed correctly, that the individual who's handling your case knows the steps and can address any concerns that arise during the process. So you can save yourselves months in processing. Mm-hmm. Not that hiring not that an attorney can speed up a case. If any attorney ever tells you that, it's a lie. They can't. No attorney can speed up your case. The government decides how fast your case processes.
There's no fast track for cases filed by attorneys.
Yeah, you don't get preferential treatment because you have an attorney. You hire an attorney because they know what they're doing. You avoid errors. You make sure your case is sufficiently supported with the right evidence so that it avoids delays in processing.
And I think part of the value too is, you have peace of mind that it's being done correctly. But if you have any concerns or something, some fact pattern changes in your case and you don't know how to address this situation, you have somebody in your corner that can tell you how to do it. Or if your case is taking longer than you think is normal, you have someone to call and say, hey, is this normal processing? Is what should I be doing here? Is there something else I need to do? And you know that you have someone in your corner to answer those questions and be there when you start worrying about your case, and having questions that come up that you just don't know how to answer and you can't find the answer on Google sometimes.
Yes, I would say that's one of the biggest services we provide is peace of mind. We've been through it. We can guide you.
We get calls from people all the time that file their own cases and they just have questions about it and they can't find the answer online. And unfortunately, we can't provide that kind of specific legal advice in,
or they hired another
call.
Attorney that doesn't answer their questions.
Yeah, that happens too. But, if you have just simple questions, you'd think that you can just reach out to somebody. USCIS does not answer simple questions on the phone. They're not going to answer simple email questions either. So if you want somebody to be there for you and hold your hand through the process, that's what an attorney can do. They can comfort you, let you know that things are processing normally, and you get that peace of mind that's done correctly.
Yeah, and for example, this petition for the U.S. citizen parents here, or the U.S. citizen petitioning for their parents, if this were filed correctly and they had a change in circumstances, Maybe the parents were in the U.S. and they decided to leave. Well, we could have instructed them, okay, this are your potential consequences of doing that. If you do that, this would be your next step and how to approach it so that they don't get in the situation that they are.
Well, then they'd have all the information to make the decision right before they leave.
And if it were done correctly, they could have left no problem and processed at the consulate, right? So you can save yourself a lot of headache.
From one wrong box.
if you work with somebody who knows what they're doing. So on to the next. So once that, let's assume your I-130 has been approved, your U.S. citizen sponsored you correctly, and we'll talk as if you're a spouse of a U.S. citizen. Those are the
it's
ones
always
we
nice
deal
to
with
get
the
those
most.
approval notices because we know if the case is moving forward and we're on to the next step.
And if you're consular processing, there's actually 3 different agencies you work with along the way. If you're doing adjustment of status, we call it a one-step because when you file it, it's all filed with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Then they'll schedule you an interview at your local USCIS service center, and it's all done through USCIS. Your background checks, everything
Your
is
interview
done
at the end, it's all done with one
here in the U.S.
One organization, yeah.
And that's all you deal with. Well, if you're doing consular processing, USCIS, when they're done with it, they send it to step 2, the second agency that you're going to deal with, and that's what is referred to as the National Visa Center that I mentioned earlier. And the National Visa Center, I don't even know what I refer to them. I refer to them, they're just basically a document collection agency. They're verifying documents and collecting documents. That's all they do. And it's kind of redundant because a lot of what they request you already submitted to USCIS and USCIS accepted it. Well, that doesn't mean the National Visa Center is going to accept it. They have their own set of criteria. And the National Visa Center will do document verification. They'll verify your biographic documents. Biographic documents are in civil documents such as your passports, your marriage certificates, your divorce decrees, birth certificate, all of those documents they will verify. And they will also, at this stage, request sponsorship information. So if you're being sponsored by a U.S. citizen, they need to show that they can financially support you here in the United States. So there's some income verification. And a key point here is if you haven't filed your taxes and you're a U.S. citizen sponsoring a Canadian, you better get filing them now because they're going to want your last 3 years of U.S. tax returns or proof that you didn't have to file. That's done at this stage, as well as police certificates. So for the RCMP, if you're Canadian, but also if you've lived in other countries after the age of 16 for more than 6 months, you're going to have to get police certificates from those foreign countries as well. And those can take time to get. And then once all of those documents are in order, this is all done electronically. You don't speak to anybody. It's all uploaded through a database online. And once you submit it, it's locked until NVC gets around to it to look at it. And right now,
at this
it takes
point
at
as
least
well,
3 months,
you're also going to be completing your immigrant visa application,
which is your biographic information. So where have you lived in since you were born? Where have you worked since you were born? Have you ever committed an immigration violation?
Sure, lots of security questions, and we get a ton of questions from people and clients filling out this application. We don't do it for you, but we will.
We actually can't.
Yeah, we will answer your questions on what to say because some of the questions, people don't know the answers to. They ask about your previous travel history and your previous history in the United States. And some people have complex situations. And even if your situation isn't complex, sometimes the questions are,
confusing.
You don't know how to answer them. So,
or you're afraid you answer it one way, you might get denied.
Yeah. Is my minor theft from when I was 16 years old, shoplifting in the mall, do I have to say yes to ever being arrested? I mean, that's a question that a lawyer will be able to answer for you. Yep. You wouldn't really know what to do with that if you were just looking at it on your own. It's not clear. Little
bit of advice. Don't lie.
Right.
I'll give you that one piece of advice here. Do not lie.
If you think the answer is yes, you're better off putting yes.
Do not lie.
Although
try to hide it.
I had one client, in the question, have you ever been deported from the United States? He put yes, he'd never been deported from the United States. However, he just thought that he was because of one time he went to the border and they didn't let him in. And so he thought he was deported. So Then if you check that wrong, you know what happened? They started asking him for all kinds of documentation
About
information about his
deportation that never
deportation
happened.
hearing. Right. That didn't happen. And then trying to explain to the National Visa Center, well, actually, there isn't any paperwork to provide to you because he really wasn't ever deported and
Check
he
the wrong
made him
box.
check the wrong box. That's a process. That's a process that takes time and takes time away from the processing of your case and having your case move forward.
Yeah, and now that you make that point, once you upload everything to the National Visa Center, you think you got it all correct, it locks your account. You cannot make any submissions once you submit. And it warns you, you're about to submit. Are you sure? Once you do this, you can't make any changes. You hit submit right now, and it's taking 3 months or more for NVC to review those documents that you just submitted.
Yeah, that's not to interview. That's just for the National Visa Center to review them.
That's it. And if one of those documents is out of order and they don't like it, then they will reset and make a request. It could just be for one document or all if they don't like any of them. And then guess what? That resets. So you would then fix any errors or omissions, submit again, and guess what? It's locked again for
Could
at
be
least another 3 months.
Yeah.
And NVC has a very, very picky criteria.
Oh, they are, yes, way more picky than USCIS with their documents.
Your birth certificate, it better be from the right issuing authority. If it's not, they'll reject it.
Never mind.
Your marriage certificate better be the right kind. It better be a long form birth
Your PDF
certificate.
better be in the right format, and it better have the right
horizontal,
amount.
not vertical.
Yeah.
Right?
Or the orientation of your PDF needs to be correct,
Yep.
and you better be able to see all 4 corners of that document.
It better be 100% legible. If there's any part of it that's shaded,
high quality
or
scan, full document.
you have a water stain or coffee stain on it, you better get another document.
Or some clients that send you pictures of documents with their hands holding the document.
Yeah,
and
they don't like that.
No.
Yeah, all of these things that seem very nitpicky could get your document rejected. And then the
add time to
NVC
your case.
will request it again and add time. Now, not saying NVC is perfect because they are far from perfect. They reject things that they should accept all the time. So it's difficult working with them, and it's very frustrating because it's all done electronically. You don't speak to anybody, and they can make all the errors they want, but you can't make any.
Right.
And even if you don't make any, if you don't make any and they do, well, you're the one that suffers.
Yeah.
Now you can try to rectify it and request expedited review of your documents if you think NVC is making the error.
And there's ways to get to put them on notice. Sometimes we see them asking for documents that don't apply, like marriage certificates for people that aren't married.
Yeah.
And there's a way to address that. And if you're not using a lawyer, you're probably not going to do it the right way, and you're going to run into a hard time moving your case forward.
It'll take months to fix those omissions or errors. We actually just submitted for a client, and they were having issues in uploading their documents, and they kept getting rejected. And one of the documents that was rejected, you have to prove your domicile. In other words, that you have a U.S. residence or that you intend on moving to the United States when your immigrant visa is approved.
So this is for the U.S. citizen petitioner. They
The
have
petitioner.
to prove that
Yeah,
they're domiciled in the United
Yes.
States, which doesn't mean that if your U.S. petitioner isn't living in the United States, you can't show this. But there are ways to prove it.
Yeah, you have to show your U.S. citizen sponsor has to show their intent or actual domicile in the U.S. Anyway, they submitted a utility bill from their home in the United States with their name on it.
That sounds like pretty good evidence.
Which is if you look at the NVC checklist of documents to prove domicile, it's listed. They rejected it.
Was it a bad scan?
Perfect doc. No reason for rejection. Very frustrating.
Yeah. So
When
what do
they
you do
reject
with
it.
that, right? If you're not using an attorney, I personally wouldn't know what to do with that. We sent in what you asked for, and now you're saying that it's not good enough. So what do I send now?
Yeah, and I will say that these final 2 steps are far more difficult and lead to far more denials than the first step, that I-130 petition. The MVC and consular processing is far more complex.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that people, when I talk to them, and if they're trying to be economical about their process. Maybe they're a young couple just starting out. I counsel people that if you're going to take on one of these 2 steps on your own, you're better off trying to tackle the first step, the I-130 on your own, than doing the National Visa Center and Consular Processing on your own. It's just a much more nitpicky and difficult process to navigate.
Agree 100%. And we do often get people that do get that first step approved. They did it on their own, and then they're stuck, and they don't know how to get through the MVC. So yes, it is a much more difficult process to get through. And there's much more room for error too, with what is required. So once the MVC reviews all those documents that you submitted, and then we'll assume that everything's kosher, it fits their requirements, they will do what is called, they will qualify your case. It'll become documentarily qualified. In other words, they reviewed all your documents. It's the correct form of a birth certificate. Your U.S. citizen sponsor meets the income requirements. Your U.S. citizen sponsors showed that they have either domicile or intent to domicile in the U.S. If you were divorced, they accepted your divorce decree. Whatever those documents are that were required in your case were all accepted. They qualify your case. Now, what do? Well, they notify the consulate that they've qualified it. That's all they do. They say, Montreal, we reviewed John Doe's documents and they all look good. And then NVC will tell you, hey, we documentarily qualified your case and we notified the consulate. Now you sit and wait until the consulate has an available appointment. The NVC does not schedule your appointment. They do not do that. The consulate does.
Even though the National Visa Center is part of the Department of State, it's not the part that does the interview. So it's here in the U.S. Right. So this actually has to be now moved over to the consulate in your home country, which if you're Canadian is going to be the consulate in Montreal. And they will be the one that make the ultimate decision as to when you're coming in, and they will be the one that notify you by email that you have an interview scheduled. So check your emails frequently. It just happens to just show up in your inbox. There's no warning. Make sure that you don't change your email address between working with the National Visa Center and the consulate. So that's one important point. You don't want to miss that interview notice, and it can slip through. Check your spam.
And they could give you very short notice. I've seen them, hey, show up to your interview in 2 weeks. Yeah. Most of the time, they give you around 30 days or so. But they could say, hey, your interview's in 2 weeks. Show up.
Yeah, I had someone during COVID who got her interview within the 2-week window. And she was actually visiting her spouse in the United States at the time she received the notice. So not only did she have to travel back to Canada during COVID, but she also had a 2-week quarantine once she got there. So she had to reschedule her interview because she couldn't attend. She couldn't leave her home in Canada for 2 weeks. So she ended up missing that interview, rescheduling it, missing the interview, and having to go in the next month once she'd completed all of the work. They didn't give her enough time.
Well, and there's also something else you need to keep in mind. When there's a medical that needs to be performed, and that cannot be done until the consulate notifies you. So you need to be prepared. As soon as you get that notification from the consulate that your interview is scheduled, it gives you instructions on how to obtain that medical and where you can get it.
Get on the phone to that doctor and get that appointment made, because sometimes these doctors are booking out, a little while, and sometimes it takes them. They don't. Yeah, I've heard where they're not immediately turning around these medicals. So they'll do the exam, they'll sign the paperwork, but it's not submitted for a week or two. So.
Make sure you're ready to hit the ground running once you get that interview notice.
Right, because your medical, I forgot to mention, could also involve you needing to get certain vaccinations or tests done. That can take time as well. So, you have to build that into your plan.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to go through this process. Pre-COVID, you could get through this process in a year and a half. Now, on average, you're looking at 2 years or more for these cases. Some people...
When I did this process, when I got married to my U.S. citizen spouse, it took 8 months start to finish. Total.
Wow.
130, a consulate, a National Visa Center, interview, everything. 8 months start to finish.
Yeah, I remember.
And then 9/11 happened.
Yep, and that's exactly what happened. And then
the forms turned
restructured
into like
the
20
whole
pages, and the whole process just became more and more of a security check. And then now we're looking at what, 15, 18, sometimes 24 months.
Yep. Depends on processing. And things like COVID can delay processing. So you need to plan ahead. And definitely, and they'll warn you about this with all the notices that they give you, either from USCIS or MVC or the consulate. Do not sell a home. Do not make travel plans. Do not make any permanent plans until you have that visa in your passport and you've been approved, because you don't know when it's going to come or if you'll even get it. So if you're making future plans on this, that's scary. Don't set marriage, like you have fiance visas that go through a similar process. You can't set a marriage date that you're going to be able to count on, and that immigration is going to process your case in time.
Keep in mind, like this wasn't a marriage-based case, but just today I got notified that a client finally received his visa today, 5 years after his initial interview.
Holy cow.
5 years. Mind you, COVID happened in the intervening time, and it wasn't a spousal case. It wasn't a priority case.
Oh, so
it was a...
it's a sibling or parent?
It's actually a married son of a U.S. citizen, and he was over 21.
It'll take much longer to process.
Much longer to process, but finally got his visa. So if he'd sold his house when he had his initial interview and made plans to move, this guy was waiting 5 years. He quit his job, any of those things. Luckily, he was smart enough not to take any of those actions before he finally has the visa in his passport. And now he's going to come get the visa. He's going to get the visa. He's going to come to the United States. He's going to process for his green card, and he's going to return home to Canada for a month or so to tie up all his loose ends before he actually moves to the United States.
Did it the right way.
Yes.
Unlike the individual I spoke to just yesterday, who called, was referred by another immigration lawyer, which I'm always skeptical when I get that call. It's like, you already have an attorney. Why am I talking to you? Your attorney should be advising you on this. This person was irate because they tried to enter through our lovely Windsor, Detroit area with a U-Haul full of belongings because they wanted to come down and set up their home because they plan on immigrating here and their visa is processing through the consulate.
But this wasn't a U.S. citizen, Canadian citizen couple, was it?
It was a Canadian.
It was a Canadian individual?
Oh, but this is to underscore the importance of having a visa in hand to do certain things in the U.S. You have to have that visa before you come. You can't put the cart before the horse, because this individual showed up without the visa authorizing work in the U.S. while it's pending at the consulate in Toronto. This was actually for an investor, but very similar situation as far as waiting for your visa. Refused entry, and individual doesn't understand why. Well, you don't have a visa that authorizes you to work and live in the U.S. yet. You are a Canadian visitor. You cannot do that until you have the visa. Down. What shocked me most was the attorney didn't advise properly on this.
Oh, they had an attorney working on that?
Yeah, an immigration attorney.
Wow.
And that attorney said to call us to help fix it. Well, unfortunately, and I don't want to come off as rude or mean, but if we don't file a case and another attorney is handling, this is still processing. It's still at the consulate waiting for interview.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we're not going to step in.
Yeah, you can't.
And we can't. And unfortunately, they messed up. And they messed up bad. And it's really messy to get in there and try to fix this stuff. So oftentimes there's nothing we can do, and we'll turn you away if that's your situation. So important to work with the right people. I mean,
I did have a similar case with a spouse of a U.S. citizen, and they had been living in Canada, and they decided to show up at the border. They hired I won't say it, a law firm in Toronto, immigration firm, to help them with their move to the United States. And they received a letter from that lawyer. I think we've talked about this before on that podcast, saying that, hey, border officer, let us in. Yet. No, they had not filed anything.
Different, right?
Yet. So they were able to switch attorneys, and we're helping them out
and
now.
But do it correctly.
The recourse is they have to continue to live in Canada until we can get this done.
Yeah.
You know, that they
And now
can't.
they're flagged and everything else that comes along with that. But they hadn't filed it yet.
No.
This person had already filed with an attorney. It's pending.
Yeah,
So
that's
bad advice. And this person thought they were very entitled, which added to it. But no matter who you are, what your circumstances in life, they don't care. There is a process, and you must go through that process.
I think I advise people like once a week. I get phone calls from people telling me their, personal situation in their immigration case. I'm like, a lot of times I'm like, it's irrelevant. They don't care. They just don't care, especially when you've got, people that have started. I have a couple now. They did the fiance visa process on their own. It was a Canadian-U.S. couple. And they just Googled it and figured it out on their own. And they got through the process, and she was in the United States and they were getting married. And they rightly realized that adjusting her status in the United States after they were married was going to be complicated. So they called us for help. They were flabbergasted to hear that she was going to not be able to leave the United States for a period of time. And this really impacted her family because she had children living in Canada. I think they're grown, but at the same time, she is emailing me once a week because she can't get to Canada. But this was a process they chose without any input from an attorney. Unfortunately, if they had called us before they started, we would have been able to navigate this process and kept her travel open and available to her throughout. But they moved forward without assistance, and now they're stuck. She's stuck in the United States. I mean, she's with her spouse. She's not uncomfortable, but at the same time, her travel's impeded, and she doesn't like that. So sometimes if you do it certain ways, plan in advance, talk to a lawyer, you can make changes to your application or file in a certain way to accommodate your lifestyle.
Yeah, and these are questions that we like to ask in our initial assessment of a case. Do you need to travel or work during this process? Because that can determine which one you take. Mm-hmm. If you absolutely have to work or travel, well, adjustment is not going to work
for you.
However, you can do that if you consular process. You can continue to visit the United States as long as you maintain your residence in Canada, as long as you maintain employment and in your life in Canada. You can continue to travel back and forth and visit your U.S. spouse throughout the entire process. No problem. Right. If you're working in the U.S., let's say you have a TN visa in the United States and you're consular processing, you can continue to travel back and forth on your TN as long as you're consular processing and you maintain your foreign ties until they approve you to come permanently.
Yeah, I love when I talk to people and they call me and they say, "Hey, we're getting married, but we're not going to do it for a couple years, we're just planning now because we think we want to live in the United States." So you may not, a lot of people wouldn't want to talk to these couples, but that's when I say, you know what you should do? Get married now and start the process, because in 2 years you'll have your green card and you can move to the U.S. and start your life together. So, it's really important to plan long in advance for these types of moves and talk to an attorney early in the process, just to make sure that you can accommodate your lifestyle and that the immigration system doesn't impact it, and cause you to be stuck in the United States because you're trying to do something in a hurry.
And there's one other thing that can happen at your interview, your immigrant visa interview. You can be stuck in what is called, it's a black hole of immigration called administrative processing. You know
what's funny though? I just have to interject here is we talk about being stuck in the United States. To people from countries throughout the world, they're like trying to get here, and they don't consider it to be stuck. But our Canadians, they all consider it to be stuck in the United States. I think just because it's so close and all their families there, they're like, "What do you mean I'm stuck in the U.S.?" It's just a different perspective for a different culture,
Canadians
right?
Have to have their ability to travel.
To go back to Canada. It's very true.
Yeah. And then we'll have other client from India. They've been here 30 years and they've been here illegally that entire time, and they're fine staying until they get their paperwork.
Or they've been here legally, and they say, "Yeah, I can't wait to get my green card because I really want to go home and visit my mother. I haven't seen her in 15 years." And after talking to our Canadians that are like, "I have to go home and visit my mother every weekend."
It's so funny.
It's a different perspective.
True.
Yeah,
so true. But administrative processing. So after your interview, if that consular officer wants to do further review of your case, if they want additional documentation that's above and beyond what's normally required, or if they have a database hit on your name or something about you, and you have to pass additional security clearances, you can be put in what's called administrative processing, which does not have a defined processing time.
Didn't it used to? I feel like it used to be 90 days or...
They used to say that they cleared most cases out of administrative processing within 60 days.
60, okay.
But if you check now...
Was it ever 60 days? I don't feel like...
Yeah, it was...
Maybe.
Usually within 3 months, people would be cleared out of it. Now, they say don't even contact us to ask where your case is at if it's within 180 days.
Oh, my gosh. So if you're in administrative processing, it's really like a black hole.
It is. And they have no time frame for which they have to respond to you or to clear it out. They can take as long or as little time as they please.
And they can give you as much or as little information onto what they're looking into.
They don't even have to tell you why.
Yeah.
Would you say we're putting you in administrative processing? Well, why?
I mean, a lot of times it's security reasons, right? They're doing more background checks.
Or they want a
and things.
document or something.
Yeah.
Maybe you had a criminal history and they want more information about your charges, or you had an immigration violation and they want to look into that more.
But you get put in administrative processing. They ask you for certain documents, you submit them. Or I know a lot of our consular applicants have to complete there's a specific form, a questionnaire on it. And you submit that, and you could literally sit there for 6 months waiting for them to review that information.
Or they just ask.
And you can't even follow up on it until that point in time.
Yep. Or they just ask, I know you provided your background check, but I want this document from the court. And it's a simple document that you go and get same day and return it to them. And then 3 months later, they say, approved.
Yeah.
And they could have literally just done it that second. But they don't.
They don't.
Because they don't have to. But we just had one clear administrative processing. And this individual was in it for 2 months. And it was a basic request about their immigration history. I also have another one who is currently administrative processing that's been in there for 5 months.
Wow. With
no end in sight. For basic requests, too. These aren't crazy requests that these individuals got from Consulate. They're straightforward requests that they were able to respond to within days.
And a good point to note here is if these people didn't have an attorney, they wouldn't know what's going on with their case. But even though we can't move it forward, we can let them know that this is normal.
Yeah.
They should just
relax. Responded
you have to relax,
properly.
Be patient.
Yep. And just wait.
You will get a decision. You just have to wait.
And this goes back to your point, plan well in advance, right? Because if you never know what's going to happen and you can't set dates as to which you're going to have certain things done by, you cannot do that for U.S. immigration. A plan for the worst, right? And then hopefully the best happens, and it happens quickly. But yeah, you have to plan accordingly for U.S. immigration. Well, thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Arrive podcast. If you haven't already, you can subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and check us out on our website where you'll find tons of information about U.S. immigration in our FAQ section, as well as access to our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to our weekly mailing list where we send out updates on U.S. immigration law. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.